Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear guests of CoseShave TV, followers of CoseShave TV. I have this auspicious occasion today to have two esteemed guests on Zoom from Canada, I believe, and they are from the Uyghur community, and they represent the Uyghur community in Canada, and they are both from a organization called the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project. So I have with me Mehmet Toti, who is the executive director of the URAP, which is the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, along with also brother Abdul Qayyum Masimov, who is the project manager. Today we're going to speak about, in this episode, along with our esteemed guests, about the current crisis, what many people are calling today, political commentators, which is a genocide of the Uyghur community by the Chinese Communist state. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome both of you to CoseShave TV. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining us today.
Wa alaikum assalam, and thanks for having us.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you, Mehmet, and thank you, Qayyum. Okay, so before we begin, if you can briefly introduce yourselves and tell me a bit about the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, which you have established, I believe, in Canada. What part of Canada is it in? Very briefly, please.
Okay. My name is Mehmet Tohti, originally university teacher in East Turkestan, Kashgar University, before escaping from China in 1991. And since then, I lived shortly in Turkey before coming to Canada. And since 1998, I'm living in this beautiful country and doing advocacy work on behalf of our people who are living under Chinese occupation. This Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project is the research and research project, basically, documenting the human rights atrocities taking place not only inside East Turkestan, at the same time preparing documentation for the Uyghurs who are still under harassment, intimidation, and the threat by the extended arms and the length of Chinese Communist Party abroad. And also we work with the Uyghur refugees trapped in some parts of the world without having any access to proper protection and a safe sanctuary. And for that reason, our project is important, and also and Qayyum and I the start initiative to bring some Uyghur refugees in Turkey, Egypt, and some other places who do not have any status, and some of them even stateless, and help them to bring Canada by doing some advocacy work with within the Canadian government.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Mehmet. So you mentioned in 1991, you actually left East Turkestan.
Yes.
Which is it under the Xinjiang province?
The Xinjiang is the Chinese name, and it is unilaterally imposed by the Chinese government, which literally means new territory or new frontier. It may be the new territory for China, but it is not new for us, and this is our historical land that our ancestors have been living since millennium. And so Uyghurs and Kazakh and other Turkic people, they made this place as their ancestral homeland, and they called it East Turkestan. And the Chinese government changed it to China unilaterally without any consent of the inhabitants, original inhabitants there. So we still prefer to call with the original name East Turkestan because it is much easier to say. And the Xinjiang, that name, some people say Xinjiang, some people say Zhenyang, and it is really difficult because it is a Chinese name. So it is just better to just use the easier one, which is the original name, and it is East Turkestan.
Okay, brilliant. So, I mean, you've been doing this, Mehmet, I'm going to come to you as well, Brother Qayyum. You've been doing this, you're saying, advocacy work for your people in that region from 1998, I believe, right?
Yes, in Canada. And for the research purpose, we established Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, which is abbreviated as URAP.
Europe, yes,
Yeah.
indeed. I said, Brother Qayyum, if I can just bring you in now in terms of your involvement as a project manager, partly your story as well, and how you began working and doing advocacy work for the Uyghur community.
Yes, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, Brother Adil, for inviting me, and I am delighted to be here and to speak up on behalf of the community. So my name is Abdul Qayyum Masimov, and I am actually from the Western Turkestan. I was born in ex-Soviet Union, Uzbekistan, but I am originally ethnic Uyghur. But I've been involved in the advocacy since my early childhood because we grew up in a family. And my father was a refugee himself. He fled from communist China at that time to then Soviet Union. And he always dreamt going back, but it didn't happen. So I would guess I am maybe the second or even the third generation now who's been fleeing from this oppression. I've been in Canada since 2001, and as Mehmet told, we've been advocating, and I am now with Uyghur Advocacy Project, and we do lobbying and advocacy efforts on behalf of the community. And indeed, the situation is really, really grave. It's really, really bad. You know, one can think it cannot get worse, but every day we're getting news that the situation is even getting worse. You know, so unimaginable tragedy, unimaginable suffering, and we do share and we do value any and each opportunity to speak up. So thank you very much for inviting us today.
Nice, you're welcome, and the pleasure is all mine. It's my duty, first of all, for the sake of humanity, our brothers and sisters in humanity, and number two, our brothers and sisters in faith, of the Islamic faith as well. And I believe it's very important for us to highlight this issue, and public awareness needs to be focused on even more. You mentioned the dates 1998, when Brother Mehmet, for example, began doing a lot of the work after fleeing himself in 1991. And I know it's a kind of the trajectory usually is a lot of the Uyghur Muslims, they go to Turkey first, and I believe you have linguistic and historical links, like more than 67% of the vocabulary is very similar, I've read about. But yeah, we only heard about this issue. We as the international community, as a Muslim community, as Westerners, only heard about this crisis like 2 years ago, back in 2017, 2018, right? For us, it's like new. But as always, there's long centuries of historical discord and tensions which has come to light. What has your response been, seeing that in the last 2 years, in particular since 2018, there's been more international media coverage of this issue? What do you think the reason is of that?
Yeah, it is a really difficult the process for Uyghurs since the occupation in 1949. And in compare, you'll notice that Tibetans got much wider and broader support and attention globally. Mm-hmm. And we have been doing exactly the same, but somehow, because of our Muslim and Turkic background, maybe, we have been telling the same story, maybe a much worse story, but somehow it was more sexy to do advocacy work for Tibetans. rather than Uyghurs. And just let me give you one example. 1991, I escaped from persecution. Since then, Chinese government did not allow my mother or brothers or any of my close or far relatives to come and see me. So it is a total isolation since 1991. And we have been telling the story. And just because the 3-4 years ago, when this concentration camp started, we have been advocating with the Western capitals, and we have been telling our children stories, such as, hey, our parents' relatives disappeared. We lost connection. We cannot send them email. We cannot say them hello. No phone communication, no text messaging, no photo sharing. And it is the concentration camp. Chinese government are holding more than 1 million Uyghurs. Our response we received from the Western capitals at that time was, okay, we know that you got a problem with the Chinese government, but do not exaggerate.
Right.
The government doesn't do that. We gave our personal examples, personal testimonies. We were talking about our mothers, parents, siblings. It was unbelievable. It was shocking. And why I'm mentioning this, there are some capitals in the Middle Eastern or Muslim countries' capitals, still people think this is the Western conspiracy. That those countries just using the Uyghurs as an excuse to attack China. This is the story. And when we had a hard time just convince the Western capitals, then what we did is we tried to convince the Chinese journalists. And some Chinese journalists went there because it was easier for them to travel there because of their ethnic background. And Emily Feng, Iwa Do, those are the Chinese journalists working for Wall Street Journal and some other Western media organizations. When they went there and they figured out, hey, the concentration camp is going on there. And then there is another gentleman from Canada, the law school student, ethnic Han Chinese. He disbelieved at the same time, so he decided to research. And he figured out from satellite images the exact location of concentration camps. And he identified more than 75 the coordinates of exact location of the concentration camps. And then the Western capitals started to pay attention, and much more media attention came and started to look into the stories, and the Western journalists also one after another, they start to visit the area with extreme difficulties, and they saw what is happening there, at least the checkpoints every 50 meters. And digital facial control surveillance and the desert cities and the streets of Uyghur neighborhood and the demolished mosques and the locked mosques. After they figured out and they start to check back the Google Earth map, and some mosques disappeared. 3-4 years ago it was there, and now it isn't. So what's going on? Then all of a sudden, especially the United States and some other Western capitals, they start to pay attention. Is this enough? No. That's given the atrocities, level of persecution, scale and the scope of the suffer that Uyghurs are enduring every day. Right. And the number of people disappeared, number of people locked up, number of the children separated from their families, number of the people sent to mainland China as slave laborers. Given the atrocities, still there is no attention, because after the Second World War, the world community promised never again. Yes. And that never again is occurring again and again. And so when we, 3 years ago, when we talked about concentration camp, no one believed. Now it is the common belief. And when we say it's not only the ethnic and the genocide, it is the genocide, the collective effort of the Chinese state with full mobilization of state power, just aiming at the eradication of entire ethnic group from the earth. That is what the Chinese Communist government is doing. And so, right, given the atrocities, level and extension of the suffer, still there is no any attention. And there should be all people, it should be outrageous for world community. Mm-hmm. The world community should just stand up for communist, and still there are more than 80% of the countries, they are doing business with China as usual. And it's most of the Muslim countries, they are praising Chinese persecution. And so still we did not achieve that level of attention from the world community.
It's quite shocking for people to hear, maybe, and incredible to hear things and read news reports and to watch news reports of forced sterilization of the Uyghur Muslim women, of Chinese state officials forcibly living with these families whilst their husbands and the men of the household are dragged away, are incarcerated in these concentration camps, internment camps, call them what you want, right? Yeah. The Chinese state obviously calls them re-education camps or vocational program like colleges. Yeah. It's quite incredible for a lot of us to hear this, forced sterilization, more than 1 to 2 million people going missing. In the 21st century, in 2020. But you say it's business as usual. But I'm just curious as to, in terms of the Muslim national response, we know about the letter that was written in 2019, I believe, by more than 22 nations. A letter was written to the president of the UN High Commission for Human Rights, nations calling on China to end its mass detention program they call the Xinjiang province, East Turkestan. And following that condemnation, you had, I believe, 37 nations, majority of them,
50
or 50 nations, yeah. Majority of them are being African, Middle Eastern, many Muslim nations from Pakistan to Saudi Arabia,
Muslim nations, yeah.
Bahrain, UAE, Egypt, many Muslim nations, in fact, right, that actually supported the Chinese policies towards the Uyghur Muslims in East Turkestan. And the Chinese argument is it's done under the pretext of, or what we see, the pretext of, countering extremism and terrorism. Because there were some incidents, I believe, that took place. What do you say about this? What do you say about this excuse of terrorism and counter-terrorism that is used in order to enforce these draconian laws on the Uyghur Muslims?
Listen. We are living in Western societies, and the crime happens even in the peaceful countries. If you look at the Chinese narrative closely, they say in 2013, there was a train station attack in Kunming city, and the 2 Uyghur men stabbed and killed 29 Chinese men. Just imagine, it is the busiest just hub. Just before the train station, 1 million people are commuting every day, and the 2 Uyghur men, and they're taking up the knife, and they're killing 29 Chinese men. People are waiting their turn instead of stopping them. Just visualize that scene. Is that possible? The Chinese government created or fabricated that kind of stories, or they install their own agents. And because since 2001, the Chinese government tried to label the Uyghur opposition in exile, and it just tried to associate them with the terrorism. But they could not back up with any evidence on the accusation. And so it happened when 21 Uyghur men in Guantanamo Bay, because they are found in Pakistan and transferred to Guantanamo after the military tribunal interrogation more than 2-3 years. They couldn't find anything with them, and so US decided they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and they wanted to release them. Chinese government put pressure on all countries, possible countries of candidate countries who are going to accept them. Just Chinese government did everything to block those countries from accepting them with the same excuse of terrorism. And those people later on released to Bermuda, and some of them in Albania, and some of them in different countries. More than 11 or 13 years passed, those people live a peaceful life, trying to establish their own life. And so it didn't, the outside Chinese government couldn't find any excuse to justify it as terrorist label to Uyghur organization. So what they did, and inside they tried to fabricate it. And otherwise, just imagine in London or anywhere in this Western capital with the 15 million population living in it. And the 2 men, not with automatic rifle, just with a knife, killing 29 people, and the people are waiting in line for their turn to be slaughtered. That does not happen. People, at least they escape. Because 2 Uyghur men versus millions of Han Chinese and hundreds of the police, armed police, and the train station or security guard. Just imagine that realistic. So it is all fabrication from the Chinese government. And in fact, they did not offer any evidence. They did not offer any trial records. They did not offer what happened to those 2 Uyghur men. And still we don't know. But that label still everywhere on Western media. Oh, Uyghurs did some terrorist attack. And the crime happens. And after, when you occupy another nation, resistance happens, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently.
Yes.
And the best solution for this is not about just locking up all Uyghurs in concentration camp, or put them in slave labor, or control their birth rate, or separate the kids from their parents. It is not the way. And it is the peaceful dialogue, or look into the deep root of the problems, how you can solve it. If it is a social or cultural or ethnic problem, or income equality, or what else? And the Chinese constitution already designated that area as Uyghur Autonomous Region. If it is Uyghur Autonomous Region, then why Uyghurs do not have a right to self-government, right? Why they do not govern themselves? The Chinese government, the Chinese constitution granted them autonomy, Uyghur Autonomous Region. Still official name is still in the Chinese constitution. Right. And so the problem is somewhere else. It is about occupation. It is about extermination of the Uyghurs, just to eliminate the owner of this historic land and then make it permanently Chinese. That is the basic purpose.
Okay, you know, this is in fact very educational for me, because I had no idea, in fact, that it's actually stated in the Chinese constitution that the East Turkestan region is an autonomous.
Their full name is Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. It is on the constitution. And if you look at the Chinese currency, you see the Uyghur script there.
Right, okay.
There are 5 scripts on Chinese currency: Chinese language, and another is Mongolian language, Uyghur language with the Arabic script.
Okay.
You can see that. Yes. And the Chinese flag, there are 1 big star and 5 small stars. One of the stars represents Uyghurs. At the beginning of the occupation, Chinese government, in order to please Uyghurs, they did everything. They did everything. They print our script on their currency, and still it is there. And now, After the 70 years of occupation, they think that the old generation who experienced independent East Turkestan are gone, and they managed to educate new generation with the Chinese mind. And so Chinese government feels that we can do whatever we want, but history is not forgotten that easy.
Yes, yes. But at the same time, as you mentioned, following the Second World War, the mantra was never again, never again. You know, meaning history also repeats itself, unfortunately. I have in front of me the UN definition of genocide. So it's a Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, Article 2. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. So these are the 5 points.
Yeah.
Number 1, killing members of the group. Number 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Number 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Number 4, imposing measures intending to prevent births within the group. And number 5, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Now I want to bring in Qayyum so I can have a bit of your input as well, please. We see the 5 points mentioned in the definition of what genocide is. We see the 5 points many people saying today all apply to the Uyghur Muslims. In fact, many say if you just have one of those criterias, that is considered genocide. But we can see all 5 according to the reports, according to the journalism, according to the news that we've come across. So Qayyum, what do you make about that?
Well, it is very sad that in 21st century, we're still debating and talking about genocide, actual genocide. And if you look at the broader context internationally, you know, the things which comes to the mind when you mention the G word is what? Indian Kashmiris, Palestinians, Syrians, you know, Uyghurs, Rohingya people.
Yes.
So what commonality we have in it? They all are Muslim people who suffer the most, you know, and the suffering of Uyghur people is not new. I'd like to make a remark. Indeed, within the 5-10 years, it's been intensified, and it was brought to the international attention. But one thing was never changed, that since occupation in 1949, the assimilation policies, repression was there, but maybe at the smaller scale. And maybe at that time, China was weaker, and they tried to use carrots and sticks at the same time. Nowadays, it's all about sticks. And, you know, in the mind of a community, there are no adjectives needed to describe what is happening. There is nothing like as cultural genocide, demographic genocide. This is simply put a genocide, a point. That's what is happening. And as you have mentioned, all these 5 elements they do present right now. And
Yes.
we can go in details and describe what is happening. But because of the time limitation,
Yes.
I would just simply say that they all exist and they do present in the current context of Uyghur people suffering. And mind you, we talked earlier about terrorism. You know, just a few days before 9/11 events in USA, the provincial government of Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in Urumqi, they've been hosting trade exhibition for foreign investors. And the party chief of the region was venting out that this is the safest region in the world you can imagine. There has been no terrorist attack since, you know, a long time, I mean, since the beginning. And please come, invest your money, do money, and, you know, and that was a publicity punch, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And right after 9/11, maybe within a month, you know, the discourse has changed dramatically. So I'd like to ask, you know, whether they were lying. Were they lying before this 9/11 happened, or after 9/11 happened? And so, you know, the questions, they're lingering and they are in the air. And, you know, China is very used to blame us, but they blame everyone, but they do not blame themselves, for their failings. If there is such a thing as a terrorist and the domestic-grown Uyghur terrorism, as they claim this is to be, why would they not invite international media to the region? Why would they not open up the area to the observers, the UN, to come and check what is happening in the region? On one side, they advertise that Uyghurs are the happiest Muslim people in the world, and on the other side, no one is allowed to get in and even to get out.
What
So
about the journalists?
People live in the open space prison. That's what it is.
What about some of the journalists that have gone over from the West? I've seen a BBC report of the Chinese state allowing journalists to come into these, these re-education programs and these colleges, right? And carefully doing like a PR stunt to show how a lot of the Uyghur Muslims are learning Mandarin. They're dancing and they're singing the national anthem. What about that? What do you say about that? Because obviously certain journalists have been allowed in, but it's under very tight control.
Well, it's all about, Potemkin villages. It's all about decoration and the smoke screen.
Mm-hmm.
This is nothing else, just a propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
Those independent journalists who want to go there, they are followed 24/7. They're not allowed to go, and they monitor it and follow it constantly. Right now, I don't believe there are any independent media left there who can come and investigate things on the ground. This is very sad. This is territory, the size of France and Germany and Ireland all together. There are many, like more than 20 million Uyghur people living there. It's a big, huge country, but in this area of communication technologies, this is a black hole. I mean, there is no information which can be extracted, or no one can go there and do some proper investigation. And I would encourage, that, international media should go and investigate, mm-hmm. and don't take the words of the exile members as granted. Challenge us, but do a challenge and the Chinese counterpart as well. And you will see yourself, and discover what's happening. Unfortunately, this is a case that, we do have, it's like very limited or no access to the region.
Well, it's difficult because obviously, then the other side, the Chinese side, and a lot of their politicians and a lot of the ambassadors in the different countries, whether it be in the US, especially in the UK, they outrightly deny the allegations and say there's no evidence for it. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, they deny. Then they ask, for example, where's my mother? They don't answer. Mm-hmm. Where's my 38 relatives? They don't answer. Show them, to prove them they're alive. They're alive. There's no answer. And they say so-called education program ended and they're released. But recently there's one media organization did work for 2 years. Actually, they follow the Chinese Baidu, which is the Chinese version of Google, and the Baidu map, because some parts of the East Turkestan, they put just blanket. And they notes that, okay, why they put blanket? Just, you don't see anything. When they zoom in, it's just blank. There's nothing. And then when they use the same coordinates and they use Google or other advanced technology, when they check exactly the same place, there's concentration camp. The Chinese government is still building, expanding it. And so it is very common, and recently Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi also said in one of the European capital city, probably in Berlin, said that there is no such a thing in concentration camp, and all Uyghurs are graduated and they got a job. And so all Uyghurs asked the same question. Number one, my mother is 78 years old. She did not need education. And my brother, he got a job. He graduated to university. He did not need the education. And so where are they? If they graduated, where are they? And this is the question repeatedly asked by exiled Uyghurs, because we lost communication. There's no any communication with our family members. So if they are safe, or if nothing happened, so why Chinese government just do the simple thing, just allow people to communicate with their parents and their siblings, their relatives, just say hello to them. Simple as that.
When was the last time, again, if you could repeat, please, Brother Mehmet, when was the last time you spoke to your mother and your brother? And
it was on October 23rd, 2016. Just after 1 month, it will be 4 years. 4 years. And this is, it is not only my story, and all Uyghurs living abroad, they have the same story. And if it is the education program, why the Chinese government is arresting professors, doctors, singers, soccer players in National League, successful businessmen, millionaires, and the PhD students, and the religious scholars. What kind of education you are going to give them? Because they are at the top of their profession. They should be teachers. And what they are doing in this so-called education camp, if you intend to provide them education or a job skill. Now, previously, the employers, now they became slave laborers. That the education you are giving to them? And the Chinese government admitted recently that they confiscated all the wealth of the Uyghurs, entrepreneurs and businessmen and success, because we established our own industry as Uyghurs, because in China, you cannot eat everything. And when you live with the Chinese in East Turkestan, because Chinese government transferred millions of them, yes, you have to have your own industry, the food industry and the beverage and even tea or clothing and everything. We have our own sustainable industry sectors. It is self-sufficient. Chinese government destroyed all of them. And so where are they? And now many millionaires, they work in slave laborers, and all of the businesses confiscated from them and assigned to newcoming Chinese settlers. And now previously Uyghur millionaires and the bosses now working as a slave labor to the new Chinese boss who took over their own business. It's this education. And for your previous question of genocide, actually 1948 genocide definition is falling short to describe what is happening for Uyghurs. You have to add some more to give full description for what is happening for Uyghurs. For example, birth control and just birth control is not about randomly selecting some woman and putting the IUDs. It is for all. That's the reason birth rate dropped to zero, below zero. What does it mean? Within a 1 generation span, Uyghurs will be exterminated. This is the extermination, not only the mass killing. And beside the concentration camps, Chinese own media reported, they built crematoria. Why you are building crematoria? Muslims, we do not cremate the dead body. Why you are building it? And recently, New York, the custom, they confiscated more than 13 tons of human hair. The woman hair. Just imagine, every woman got 30 to 40 gram hair. To make 13 tons of human hair, you need to have at least minimum 400,000 Uyghur women. And so we know that in Auschwitz, the concentration camps and the Nazis collected the Jewish hair and they put on display after they killed them. the Chinese government simply is selling their hair after they kill them. They're commercializing it, not only selling the organs after they kill. They're selling the last part of the body here. And now the US officials are doing DNA check, DNA test of those human hairs. So we are talking about 13 million tons of, 13,000 tons of human hair. Just imagine.
I mean, just
how many people, how many women got to be shaved off to make 13 tons of human hair?
I mean,
The minimum 400,000. 400,000. And we are talking about millions of Uyghur kids disappeared. The parents alive, or some parents, they are watching their own kid on Chinese state propaganda videos. They don't know. The government never tells their parents why they took the kid, how long they are going to take them, when they are going to release. Disappeared. You don't get any information from them. No. It is permanent loss of your kids. So, as I said, the UN genocide definition is really falling short to describe what is happening. And plus, Chinese government using all high-tech advantages, just like facial recognition, DNA, and all surveillance, every step of your way, every mood, every movement are recorded and controlled, and what kind of conversation you have with your neighbors, whether you enter your home from front door or back door, how many electricity you consumed this month, how many rice you consumed, everything is recorded and controlled and checked. So this is totally different kind of genocide. It is not only the physical genocide, it is the high-tech genocide, sophisticated genocide.
yes, I mean, you're right. Maybe the definition, you mentioned 1948 definition, if I'm correct, of UN genocide, it needs to be updated because we are now seeing unprecedented means of genocide, of torture, of this is a complete human extermination. And, you know, when you mention the shaving of the hair, and to have 13 tons of hair being sold in the United States of Uyghur women, and it calculates to being probably, estimates to be about 400,000 Uyghur women. It's, you see parallels, you can see parallels between, of course, the state, the Chinese state and the Nazis of Germany, Nazi Germany, and what happened with the Holocaust of, you know, against the Jews. And it's happened again, and it's happening right under our noses. And the evidence seems to be there. Well, it is there, but it's being denied. And you yourself is a perfect example of, you know, people that have fled the country that are now speaking up. You've been speaking up for a long time, in fact. What I wanted to know is these education programs, that so-called education programs that the Chinese claim, what is the purpose? What is the purpose? Why do they want to exterminate the language, the culture, the religion of Uyghur Muslims, of the Uyghur people?
Okay. The Chinese government frequently changed the name to describe those camps. Initially, they said it is Transformation Center, Education and the Transformation Center. Later on, they said it is Vocational Training Center. Later on, they said it is Educational Center. And later on, they say it is the providing political class, and also we are teaching law and the Mandarin. So Chinese government is frequently changing the name of that place. But one thing is for sure, one gets in, never gets out. Okay. And few people got out because they got the foreign passports. For example, one lady in Mehrigul Tursun, she got the Egyptian husband. For that reason, she got out. And another 2, 3, because they got the Kazakhstan passport, and so on. Mm-hmm. And so why they do this? The Chinese government tried very hard to assimilate Uyghurs since the occupation. It didn't work because we have a unique culture, more advanced than Chinese. And we have our own language, more than thousands of years of old. And all, as you mentioned earlier, Turkic people, they speak the language from our forefathers. They moved from us to Central Asia or Anatolia and the Balkans or Caucasian area. All those Turkic people, even Tatars, and even some people said today's Huns in Hungary also moved from us. So we have an ethnic and racial connection with those people. So we are not the people from yesterday. We are historic people. And this land is our historic ancestral land. And unfortunately, occupied by China in 1949 with the collaboration by the Soviet Union at that time. And we are rich in natural resources, energy, gold, coal, all whatever you name it.
Gas.
Uranium, gas, and the rare metals for now being used for satellite and the cell phone technology. And so, especially after 2014, Chinese government announced Belt and Road Initiative. This is the new name for Chinese expansionism. Exploiting the weaker or smaller country with debt trap and slowly colonizing them. That is the plan. So to achieve that plan, the Chinese 4 corridors out of 6 going through East Turkestan. That land borders China with 8 independent countries. Without East Turkestan, China doesn't have a border with India or Pakistan or Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Russia, and those countries. Right. So this is the Western Gate. So access to Central Asian energy rich market and the Eurasia till all the way to Istanbul. So they cannot achieve the stream without having the East Turkestan under their control, because Uyghurs are fighting for their self-determination since long time since occupation. And the Chinese, Xi Jinping said, now we got the money, we can buy out some heads of states with the money, or we can silence some countries with financial incentives. So this is the time, it's the Chinese century. To achieve this Marshall Plan, we can sacrifice Uyghurs and we can completely get rid of them in order to achieve this plan. So since 2014, they made a plan. They put 4 missions to achieve: break their root, break their lineage, break their culture, break their origin. That is the doctrine put forward by the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And add one more thing: show no mercy. To do this, show no mercy. That is the quotation from Xi Jinping. And after Xi Jinping ordered this and the law, other government agencies, they developed a number of options. So how we can do it? So concentration camp, just put all adults in from 20 or to 40, 50, whatever it is, put them in torture chamber and force them to denounce their religion, denounce their ethnic background. They should eat whatever the Chinese people eat. They should worship whatever the Chinese people worship. Unless we break this barrier, we cannot assimilate them. As long as they believe in Islam, they always say this is haram, this is halal. This is what I eat, this is what I do not eat. So we have to break all these barriers. Yes. And the forced Uyghurs, after they took the male and the female to the concentration camps and just hijacking their family members, force Uyghur girls to marry Han Chinese. Otherwise, you end up in concentration camps. And whoever just between the age of 20 or 40, with the age of resistance against the government, they sent all of them to now as a slave labor under 24-hour surveillance. Put them on a large hall and control with the military discipline, and taking them in a military bus and put them in a factory and work 12 or 14 hours and bring them back and another indoctrination. That's what is happening. So basically within one span of generation, eradicate all of them or make them Chinese. Otherwise, let them die in torture. And so that they can have this area permanently, and they have achieved Chinese dream by expanding its so-called 21st century Marshall Plan to colonize some parts of the world, eventually become the boss of the whole world. That is why Uyghurs are paying price today.
What's shocking is, again, this comes back to money and finance and resources. But there seems to be not even one Muslim nation that I've come across, I can think of, that I've read about, that's willing to stand up for the Uyghur Muslims and to talk against and speak against what the Chinese state is doing. Now, I remember with the Myanmar government, with what's happened with the Rohingya Muslims, we had a very courageous politician, in fact, from the Gambian government. He was the Gambia's justice minister, Abu Bakr Tambodu, and he took the Myanmar government to the International Criminal Court of Justice, ICJ, and you know, it was about his allegations to them about Myanmar government and the Burmese government's genocide against the Rohingya Muslims. But why have we not seen a similar response happen with the Uyghur Muslims? Why is it there's complete silence from the Muslim world? Is it just to do with money? What is it exactly? Can you comment on this, Qayyum, or what do you think?
Go ahead, Qayyum.
Well, thank you for asking this question. It is a question which I cannot find an answer. Like, sometimes I'm really puzzled about it. So let me try to break it down. In my opinion, the majority of so-called Muslim countries, they are not democratic, transparent, and elected, democratically elected governments by themselves. So the leaders or the leadership of this ummah, they do not care about their own population, let alone Uyghur people, you know. Mm-hmm. That is my understanding of the situation. And it is an alliance of itself, you know. Let's say these 50 so countries which signed up paper to UN in pro-Beijing move defending these policies against China, Uyghurs. This letter was co-sponsored by, initiated by Belarus. So right now you see what is happening in Belarus. You know, people rebelled against its own dictator. So basically, if we come to the bottom line, it's one dictatorship or one dictatorial state defending the other dictatorial state. And here it's money what talks, you know, there is a monetary rewards, financial gains, and nothing else, in my understanding. So in my understanding, the Uyghur crisis right now, it's a litmus test for the whole world, and particularly towards Muslim community at large. So by looking at the reaction of Muslim countries and Muslim leadership to what is happening in East Turkestan, you can actually judge for yourself the current status, the lack of the morality in these countries. You know, Turkey used to be very vocal in criticizing China. Back in 2009, Turkish President Erdogan, he qualified things happening in our region as almost as a genocide. Right now, they're silent. Even the protests organized by Uyghur diaspora in Turkey, they are completely silenced off. There is no media reports criticizing China in Turkey. For example, Pakistan is giving back Uyghur refugee asylum seekers. Same thing in Southeast Asian countries, you know, and we can go on and on. So so-called infidel kafir states, you know, the United States as a leading country, they do defend us, oppressed Muslim people. They voice concerns at the highest possible levels, and the support which we, you know, naturally would expect from some countries, especially Central Asian states, which are linguistically and ethnically kin to us, it is deafening silence. It is shameful approach, you know, turning blind eye towards atrocities. And there is a hypocrisy, you know, when was a cartoon issued in Chinese Hebdo, you know, mocking our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The whole Western Ummah, you know, Muslim world, and from Pakistan, Indonesia, they've been manifesting for weeks and protesting this cartoon depiction of our Prophet Rasulullah. But at the same time, right now, there are mosques being destroyed, cemeteries bulldozed, Qurans burned in thousands, you know, in thousands and thousands exemplars, and there is deafening silence. So I wonder, which country is the real Muslim? Which country holds to the truth and tell the truth to the face of the oppressor? So,
I mean, yeah,
it is big moral issue which I believe Muslim Ummah should answer and seek an answer to it.
I mean, it seems like as if it's an inconvenient truth to the whole world, and especially to the Muslim world. I mean, I'm just going to go very briefly through a list of the countries that signed a letter against the Chinese government, you know, for the Human Rights Commission. And these nations that first wrote the letter criticizing China, we have Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Japan, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and the UK. Many countries also were decided to not opt out of the vote, if you like, or the letter, and they wanted to be neutral or silent, if you like. And you mentioned Central Asian countries, some Muslim countries, Turkey as well, decided to stay silent. And then you have many Muslim countries that actually wrote a letter in support for the Beijing regime and the Chinese state, which we've mentioned, obviously many of them being from Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, African countries, Cuba, Egypt, Eritrea, Cameroon, Algeria, the Emirates, Qatar, Russia, Burundi, Congo, and the list goes on. It's just, what do you think needs to be done to challenge this?
Well, just wake up and investigate, and you know, do not take for granted the Chinese propaganda. If you think this is something to do between US and China, you are mistaken. We are the Muslim community in exile. We can testify. Call us, you know, learn yourself, educate yourself, you know, and you can start from the very simple facts. Stop buying Chinese products. Chinese products made by Uyghur slave labor. I mean, this is very simple fact. Don't go and watch Mulan movie, you know, the same movie which was shot in our region. At the same time, a few miles away from those concentration camps. You know, there's so much we can do. Even ordinary citizen, which is who is somewhat apolitical, every act is does count. You know, so the most important thing is do not stay silent, boycott. You know, because silence is your consent, and if you're silent, you agree with these policies.
Yes.
And you know, there is a you know, we can go on and on, but you know, there is inner jihad and the greater jihad. You know. And the greater jihad, it's when you know, fight your ego, fight your fears, you know, and speak up the truth. So, and on and on and on. But I would definitely encourage people to reach out and to check for themselves. You know, ask you know, representatives to representing in your riding, your politicians elected to speak up and raise this issue in the parliament.
Yes.
And you know, the basic steps which I have counted already, yes, to begin with.
Indeed. Mehmet, what would you like to add to that in terms of how can we go forward? What can be done about convincing the whole world, including the Muslim nations, in fact, that stand with China in its support for its oppression and its genocide against the Uyghur Muslims?
I can only call for so-called Muslim countries to be Muslim again, because by partnering with the communist Chinese government and it is persecuting of Islamic faith, and a campaign of eradicating Islam from East Turkestan, which exists more than 1,000 years. And even just for example, Saudi Prince Salman or MBS went to China and offered support to Chinese persecution instead of asking why you banned my name Muhammad for Uyghurs.
I heard that's the latest one. I heard that last week. The name Muhammad is now banned.
Muhammad was banned, Aisha was banned, Medina was banned. It was the common name, right? And so, unfortunately, as Qayyum said, this is the test for Muslim Ummah, and we are firm believer of Islam. Islam is our religion since 915, more than 1,000 years. And we, as Uyghurs and the people in Central Asia, we contribute a lot for the spread of Islam in Central Asia and some other places.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the Muslim countries today, they are betraying, not for Uyghurs, betraying to the Islam and the teaching of the Quran. And I am very, I feel really pity for those Muslim people. How you can confront the judgment of Allah in Yawm al-Qiyamah by supporting China. This is my chilling reminder to them. What China is doing is just eradication of Islam. Why? Because Islam has been seen by China as an obstacle to assimilate Uyghurs to Han Chinese. And for that reason, China is targeting. And what else we can do? And I remind those Muslim countries, especially Pakistan and the Central Asian countries and others, they have to check their dealings and business contract with China. Mm-hmm. What kind of consequence they are in right now just because of Chinese money. Yes. Just imagine Pakistan, initially they offered the Gwadar port to China.
For 40 years.
Yeah, the Chinese government, the building China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or which is CPEC. And now Chinese government installed more than 25,000 Chinese soldiers under construction head in the region. And a major player now, they can just steer up Pakistan at any time, playing with the racial or tribal game. And also, China is doing everything possible to weaken the position of Pakistan. The reason is, a more weaker Pakistan becomes, more dependent Pakistan becomes to China. And the Chinese government knows that.
Enslavement.
Yeah, the Pakistan somehow feels happy to receive $60 billion, something loan from China, with the interest of that loan accumulated, getting bigger and bigger. Now it is more than 90 billion. In the Central Asian countries, they lost majority share of the energy and the industrial sector to China. Otherwise, you lose your sovereignty, you lose your territory, as Sri Lanka did, as Djibouti did, and many countries did, because China specifically offering a loan for those countries who are unable to pay back. When you are unable to pay back, what China asks? Territory, sovereignty.
Yes,
that's what.
I mean, they say, China is colonizing the world with business deals and business incentives, financial incentives. Whereas, the European nations during their colonial era and expansionism of the European states, they took over the world, with the barrel of a gun and by force. Whereas China is doing it with financial incentives, monetary incentives, trying to sort out, as you mentioned, Pakistan, you got the Gwadar border, you got the CPAC project, which is huge, which is costing billions, and many people in Pakistan, the government in particular, see, yes, this is our opportunity. But as you said, in life, nothing comes for free. Nothing's for free. You give.
Actually, now the Pakistani people cannot enter the Gwadar port to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, we invest in $60 billion. In fact, China did not bring one penny to Pakistan. They are selling the old construction materials, counting for US dollars. They're bringing all of them from China, and they're bringing Chinese workers, and they're using Chinese machinery, everything, and they're writing the receipt to bill to Pakistan.
And they do that also in many African nations, I believe, as well, also in Jamaica as well. I mean, it's, as you mentioned, it seems like it's Chinese state expansionism. This is like the Chinese empire, you know, slowly, you know, doing and remanufacturing, excuse the pun, what the Europeans did, you know, in the 16th, 17th, up to the 19th century. And this is exactly the same thing now. But yeah, it's sad to see that many people do not realize it, because in this world, as you know, money talks. And Qayyum, I wanted you to just tell us your final thoughts on this. You've given some feedback in terms of what we can do, write to our MPs, to politicians, maybe more talks like this, more interviews like this for public awareness. In terms of the Muslim world, I can see and hear from your voices, and me myself, there's a lot of disappointment, and many Uyghur Muslims, I understand, are disheartened about the response of the Muslim nations. How do you stay strong in a time like this and hold on to your faith?
Well, since you base in UK, I just wanted to mention that in UK, there was a launch of a public tribunal on September 3rd, chaired by Sir Geoffrey Nice,
Yes.
former prosecutor in ex-Yugoslavia's Milosevic trial.
Yes.
So Sir Geoffrey Nice is launching this campaign to bring justice for Uyghurs, and he will be looking into the possibility of qualifying atrocities in our region as a genocide. So there's a
he's quite a prominent British human rights lawyer, I understand, and
yes,
he's the one that tried to prosecute Slobodan Milosevic.
So this is a good positive step, we think, as an exiled diaspora. So this is good thing to start with. And then locally, you know, awareness, public awareness, and, you know, once you're aware of the situation, you know, no human being in his or her right mind will stay silent, I believe, and that will lead to actions. And what we as a small community in exile, we're trying to do this is to raise public awareness.
Yes.
And we should, especially specifically Western states, to demand justice and, you know, possibly launching genocide tribunal. But even before that, getting that, concrete feasible actions can be taken. Just to mention a few, let's say Magnitsky Act in UK, against those perpetrators of the Chinese state who do commit violence and unspeakable horrors towards Uyghur population, you know, and that might entail a physical and concrete steps like banning visas of those officials and their siblings, freezing their assets, etc., etc. So there are many steps which can be taken, but I would encourage public in UK to reach out a local Uyghur diaspora and seek out what kind of support and assistance they can get on the ground. But most importantly, it's lobbying and advocating. This is what we're aiming at.
I believe the lawyer that you mentioned, the human rights lawyer, who also led the prosecution of ex-Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic, I believe, according to him, the two strongest pieces of evidence is the forced incarceration and imprisonment in the, you know, the concentration camps, and also the forced or enforced sterilization program, which is quite shocking. I read recently, even women in their 50s are being forced to have these IUDs and being sterilized.
Yes, Adil, you have mentioned the concrete steps which we can take in, the government, the public. I would just maybe briefly add banning medical tourism from Europe, and particularly from UK, into China for organ transplant harvesting. You know, people, sick people who are in need of a kidney transfer or, iris transplantation. So this should be banned altogether. Any medical tourism into China, and UK should follow a good example of Australia, which banned its citizens traveling there, because in most likelihood, these organs, they do not come from volunteer donors. They are taken from alive, they harvested from prisoners, and these organs are harvested from, my guessing is from Uyghurs, most of them. So let's say in UK, there might be long waiting lines, people waiting years to get these transplantation organs.
Yes.
But in China, when you go there, within a week, you can get 2-3 options to choose from,
Wow.
So that's how bad the situation is. And then, work with the labor unions and banning all importation of cotton, just like US, they did, banning all cottons coming from China, because Chinese cotton, 90% of Chinese cotton comes from our region.
Yes.
And it is highly possible, highly likely that in the yarn production, in cotton collecting, this cotton was in part or integrally been harvested and processed by slave Uyghurs.
And it's slave labor. Slave labor.
Exactly. So there are concrete steps which can be measured and which can be traceable. And there are, with technologies existing, like let's say DNA sampling of cotton, we can even pinpoint from which region, from where it's coming from. And especially, boycotting Huawei. I'm not sure if this is still the case in UK, but Huawei is this company is a direct complicit in Uyghur genocide. It is the company, among others, who do artificial intelligence surveillance in Muslim, and they've been testing these technologies in our region, surveillance, recording, etc., etc. So it's very invasive, technology, which they have tested in our region, and now they are running in Hong Kong, for example. And we go on and on. So there are lists which can be,
yes,
addressed.
Yes, and now I see, after discussing this with you and Mehmet now, Brother Qayyum, now I can see why Mehmet mentioned the 1948 definition of the UN definition of genocide needs to be maybe updated, or the list of 5 points of criteria needs to be added to. I can see now that this actually is definitely an unprecedented case of a 21st century super state, technologically advanced, that has taken the meaning of genocide to a next level. And I don't know what you want to add to that, Mehmet, in our final thoughts.
I would like to add one more thing in a bigger picture. I was educated there. I became a university teacher. In Chinese school textbooks, still, Chinese at the center of the universe. The Zhonghua means the heavenly people. They call themselves. All other people are barbarian. They need to be tamed. They need to be subdued. That is the history, and still being taught to Chinese people. And also, you have to look closely inside what the Chinese media are talking about. For the same Belt and Road Initiative within China, it is totally a different story. They're presenting the Chinese people as the golden opportunity for Chinese people to achieve their historic mission. This is the Chinese century, this and that. So they call it 21st century Marshall Plan.
Yeah, they say quite famously there's more billionaires in China now than there is in the United States, right?
And if you look at the outside propaganda, it is the connectivity, infrastructure investment, and the friendship, mutual beneficiation, and the revitalization of Silk Road, very beautifully described. But inside, it is the chauvinistic, nationalistic presentation to bolster the Chinese pride, Chinese feeling of Chineseness, and chauvinism. So they have to review their perception. And in many Muslim countries or Muslim people, they got the wrong idea about the Han Chinese people. And we Uyghurs, we live with them. We never visit their Chinese restaurants in East Turkestan because it is not hygienic, and they eat everything from the ground, from the sea, from the sky, whatever is flying, whatever is swimming, whatever is walking. They eat literally everything. And we have a clear boundary what we can eat and what we can do. We have a morality. Lying is regarded as an art in China, but we have a morality. We do not lie. Torture is the most enjoyable thing in Chinese history. Eating human flesh is the very delicacy in Chinese history. Still, they are serving human flesh in 5-star hotels in China.
Is that, I mean, this sounds really, I've never heard this before.
Just Google it.
Is that a fact? Or that's just not...
Just after you abort the baby, they are serving that baby as a very expensive meal in Chinese restaurants. Still the case today in 2020, September 13th. This is not the exaggeration. And the people just said Wuhan seafood market. That is a much nicer part of the Chinese cuisine. So we know all of those things. So I really urge our Muslim brothers and sisters and Muslim countries to revisit their Chinese perception in their mind and to try to understand them, try to know them better. Otherwise, they will end up as losers. When they lose, they don't lose money, they lose their sovereignty, and they lose their dignity as well.
Can I add to that, if you don't mind, in response to that, in order for me to obviously be fair and objective and look at both sides? What you're saying is now to look maybe at the Chinese culture, their history, part of their culture, for example, part of what they eat, and then to understand, in fact, they're not as superior as they like to make themselves out to be in the history books and in the textbooks that you used to teach, right? But couldn't someone argue that maybe what you're now calling is, in a way, reverse racism, or being discriminating against the Han Chinese? Is that the solution really? How do you respond to something like that?
No, I'm not saying from the point of racism. I am just describing what the culture in modern days as a Han culture. And so, for example, lying is regarded art. If you look at the core Chinese founding principles, 36 martial art, all of them, how to trick people, how to lie people, how to trap people. That's what it is. Just Google it, 36 Chinese military doctrine. Today is used by Chinese Communist Party. And look at the Chinese diplomats. And any sensible or responsible state, after so many media reports and satellite images and so many eyewitness testimony and witness account, the sensible state will come up, we are sorry. We have some mismanagement. We did some terrible wrong. We are going to correct that and we are going to address it. Have you heard that from Chinese side?
I don't personally. I don't think any nation would apologize. All nations, when they make mistakes,
some of them do.
The least they could do is to stop the evil.
At least stop it.
Stop the oppression, and tend to correct things. But very rarely do they apologize. And in fact, what you mentioned there about the textbooks, because you mentioned that you are a perfect example for me of an assimilated, integrated Uyghur Muslim in China, because you were a teacher, you speak the language, you taught in the schools as well, right? And you mentioned also there are people, rich people from your community, sports people that have also been taken to these education or concentration camps. But what you mentioned about the textbooks, for me, it reminds me historically of any community or any nation that commits genocide. They all have a very similar pattern and trait. And that is, they see themselves as culturally and linguistically superior than the other. Anyone other than them, apart from them, is a barbarian, is weak. And this is exactly what the French and the British did when they went into a lot of the African and Asian nations. It's exactly what the French did in Africa, for example, in Algeria. 1.5 million, were killed and martyred. Arabic was banned, for example. Quran was banned. So I noticed that with the Nazis, same thing with the Nazis, Nazi Germany, the so-called Aryan race, the superior Aryan race. And I feel that the danger of this is we live in a time where there's a lot of nation states becoming, a lot of countries, even in Europe, far right. And it's based on this superior ethnic national identity. And we are more superior than the rest, or than the others, or than the migrants. And this is just increasing in the world right now. And it seems like we're living in a very scary time.
Yeah, at least we can debate in Western societies. And Canada, for example, apologized for their treatment for the First Nation. And the US did. And those bad things happen, and the people learn from those bad things, and they try to come up with a better path forward. But for China, there's no debate, there's no media, open media, there is no public discussion. Whatever the Communist Party, single party says, it is truth. That is the official narrative, and the people should follow. You cannot divert from the official line. So this is a totally different story. And when you have an open society and an independent judiciary, somewhat independent judiciary, you have some venues to go through. At least you can make some noise. Yes. But in China, you cannot. And it is a similar thing happened to Southern Mongolia as well. And they banned the Mongolian language, and now the Mongolian people on the street. And a similar thing for Hong Kong. And so the Uyghur situation is the worst, but if we do not take action to stop this Chinese madness, it will come. And there are Saudi Arabia or some other countries, they start to adopt the Chinese as a first foreign language, and they start to open the Chinese class in Pakistan as well. So it is coming. It is
like
coming.
we all speak English today because of the British Empire, and because of the European expansionism, the project, and a lot of these nations, they have blood on their hands and they're ashamed. We don't even in the UK, we don't learn much about the British Empire.
We don't need to learn from Chinese. We don't need to learn from somewhere else. As a Muslim, the peace we can just spread to the world. Justice, it is the core principle of Quran, and which is called adalat, right? Yes, it is the pillar of the society, because without peace, you cannot make peace. If there is no peace, there is no Islam. And so as a Muslim community, in fact, we have to be ourselves as a Muslim, get back to our roots, get back to our founding principles in the Quran, and apply to our daily life. Believe me, we have much, much more to offer to the world. We don't need to learn from Chinese or somewhere else.
Okay. It seems to me that with all the efforts, right, of the Chinese state to eradicate Islam, to eradicate Muslims and anything Islamic, similar to the Spanish Inquisition, of how they tried to get rid of anything to do with Islam or Muslims from Islamic Spain in the 15th century. This is like the Chinese Inquisition against Muslims. And in fact, it's only making you, from what I can see, more proud of your faith. You want to be more, you're more proud of your heritage, your Islamic heritage. What do you think about that, KU? In fact, this has had the reverse. This whole oppression of the Uyghur Muslims against the Chinese state has had a reverse reaction and result.
Well, this is funny because in the up to the very recent past, there was a significant proportion of the Uyghur population, thinking that okay, China will gradually change, the political situation, environment will change. We can still peacefully coexist with China, and someday, somehow, the Chinese will realize that the oppression, it's not a long-term solution, But within the last, I would say, 10 years, even those skeptical Uyghurs who've been very apolitical, shy, stay away from politics and advocating for self-determination, they became so vocal, so pro-independence, so much against Chinese communists that, in my understanding, China is shooting its own foot,
Yeah.
by pushing these people to the edge, because what else we have left? It's either, in slavery, total assimilation, and disappearing within the span of a generation or two, or to get some, our voice to be heard, So this is a social option like liberty or death. That's what it is. We are facing existential question.
And sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so from that regard, I believe what China is doing, actually, they're encouraging more, pro-independence movement amongst Uyghurs.
Yes.
And they're pushing people to the margins. And when there is no hope left, when there is a total despair, and when your wife is taken away, your girl's raped, and you're forced to eat pork during Ramadan, you're forced to drink alcohol, etc. When your books are holy books burned, your mosques destroyed, your graveyards are bulldozed, what else you have left with, So whatever dignity you have, I think any normal person will react to this. We are not animals. People do voice, their anger, and at least in their minds right now, there is a cardinal revolutionary shift. We cannot continue living like this. It is impossible to live with communist China. So from that perspective, I believe China itself, or Chinese leadership, was the first advocates for Uyghur independence.
I mean, it's interesting because there are a lot of parallels between the Zionist Israeli government and its treatment of the Palestinians,
Well, speaking about Palestinians, Palestine was one of those 50 countries who co-signed pro-Beijing letter.
The pro-Beijing letter. Can you see the irony? Look at the irony.
That's like, so. And nowadays they accuse Oman, Bahrain, and Qatar signing a peace agreement with Israel. I mean, that's so ironic, and it's what Bismarck was called realpolitik.
Realpolitik, identity politic. We live in a world of contradictions, of paradoxes, of double standards, of hypocrisies, unfortunately. And like you said, for ourselves and for many Uyghur Muslims, they are holding on to their Islamic faith even more, and they seem to be even stronger in the Islamic faith now. In terms of, holding on to whatever identity you have left when you're pushed on to the margins and you're on the verge of, what are the numbers, the official numbers now, of those that have been incarcerated, imprisoned, and those that have been killed?
Well, for me personally, it's very hard to talk in millions. We'd say millions, but behind every million, there is a human being, human life. So the estimates, they do vary very much. I have seen reports, UN report, which is very conservative, putting up the number of 1 million. Pentagon files, they've been claiming up to 3 million. Diaspora members, they claim to be around 5 million. But let alone these 5 million people incarcerated right now, even people living outside of this prison system, they do not live in freedom. They live in open air prison.
Yes.
They are constantly surveyed. There is cameras, recording every movement within the household.
In the household.
Every move. Yes. Even the knives you use in kitchen, they all chipped with electronically. Every phone call, every WhatsApp message, whatever, it's everything registered. I've been hearing stories that people, when they get phone calls from overseas, they have to report within 24 hours the whole conversation to the local police department. And if their testimony differ from what was recorded, they will be punished. You know, this is a real story. This is Orwellian situation, Orwellian society in action.
Yes, so
1984 repeating in 2020, and we can go on and on and on. The evidence is there, and I would address specifically to Muslim Ummah. Do not tell that you didn't know. Do not say afterwards, in the day of judgment, you will be not warned. So we're telling you now, this is happening. So you will not have an excuse in front of a almighty creator to say that you didn't know. That's my message, and act accordingly.
Again, I appreciate your time, Brother Abdul Qayyum, and also Brother Mehmet. You know, it's been very educational for me, and I'm being completely honest, very educational for me. And it's educational in terms of knowing the hard reality of what our brothers and sisters are going through, what part of our human family and also our Muslim family in East Turkestan. You know, we know what we've discussed today with even the birth rates are now gone to zero, dropped in certain regions over the last, was it 2 years?
Actually below zero.
It's below zero.
It's population of the local depopulation of Uyghur demographics. So it's not only zero, it's going minus, because children taken away and they brought into interior sites, separated from their parents, and they raised as Chinese within Chinese families, so-called host families in interior China. Yes.
And they're masquerading them to be Han Chinese, whereas ethnically, linguistically, they are.
They're nothing about the roots, because when they grown up, they don't know about their parents. They don't know about their roots, ethnic background.
It's a complete eradication of the people, of their roots, their history, their language, their culture, and their religion. And I pray and I hope that humanity wakes up to this, and we have the common sense, and we have the moral fiber to do what's right, whatever little thing we can do, whether it's writing that letter, whether it's discussing it like we're doing now, whether it's boycotting Chinese goods, boycotting goods that are actually made by forced labor, slave labor, by the Uyghur Muslims. And, you know, even as you said, even when they die, they don't spare them for their hair. They use their hair and they sell it. So, you know, there's a lot that's been discussed today. I'm hoping, inshallah, we can build up on this, continue having this discussion. We can network even more with other organizations, hopefully, around the world. And I pray that this will come to an end soon. And we all make dua for the Muslim Ummah and our brothers and sisters in East Turkestan, the Uyghur Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah help them. Allah yansurhum inshallah ta'ala wa izzuhum wansurhum ya Rabbil Alameen wa aghfir lana jami'an wahdi Ummah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah guide all of us, forgive us all, and give us the strength and courage to do what is right and to speak out against injustice, no matter where it is in the world, no matter who the victim may be. Ameen. Jazakumullah khair, brother Mehmet Toti and brother Qayyum, Abdul Qayyum. Jazakumullah khair. Thanks for coming again, and thanks for giving me your precious time. And Jazakumullah khair. Till we meet again.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.